First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for organizing this event. It's a wonderful idea. So thank you, Nicolas and Xixiang for this. And I totally agree with what you said at the opening of the conference about the need to foster the comparative approach to history of philosophy, and I'm really glad to be part of this. So thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about the theory of matter defended by John Buridan, who was one of the most influential thinkers of the late Middle Ages in the West. So he lived in the 14th century. As I'll try to show, I think his views on matter are interesting, not only because he was very influential, but also because his views on matter reflect important changes in the way of conceiving matter at the end of the Middle Ages. And as we will see, his views reflect some limits of the ancient model that was still currently used for conceptualizing matter, namely hylomorphism. So, like most of his contemporaries, Buridan endorses hylomorphism, which was less precise theory than a general framework in which many different theories or versions of this theory could be formulated. So, as it has been mentioned already during this conference, there were many disagreements over the status of matter in this framework. Like, what is the ontological status of this substrate? What are among the features that we see in material bodies? What are the features that are proper to matter as such? And what kinds of entities do we need to posit on top of matter to explain the structure of bodies as we perceive them in nature? So unfortunately, I won't have the time to cover all the aspects of Buridan's version of hylomorphism and his theory of matter, and I will only focus on three interesting ideas he had on the subject. So to understand his position, it's important to know his metaphysical assumptions on this topic, namely that, well, according to him, matter is something actual. It is something actual in itself or intrinsically, and not because of form. Also, matter as parts in itself or intrinsically, which is not, as we will see, according to Buridan, which is not equivalent to saying that matter as a precise quantity. And in fact, as we'll see, matter as such is not intrinsically extended, according to Buridan. So three interesting ideas. So the first original idea Buridan had about matter has to do with the relation between matter, substance, and accidents, which is very, very different from the traditional Aristotelian conception of the relation between those concepts. So, according to the traditional Aristotelian view, a concrete or composite substance is composed of matter and substantial form. And this concrete substance is the substrate of accidents. So, according to this traditional interpretation of hylomorphism, accidents inhere in the substance, so the compound of matter and form, but not in prime matter as such. And the reason for this is that we don't say that matter is male, white, or tall, but we only say of concrete individuals like Socrates or Plato that he's or she's, well, he is in that case, male, white, and tall. And this was a core principle of the traditional understanding of substance and accidents. But surprisingly, according to Buridan, this is wrong. And this is wrong because it's not possible to explain basic empirical observations with this theory. For Buridan, accidents inhere in matter as such and not in the substance. They only inhere in the substance in a derivative sense. So only insofar as they inhere in prime matter first. So accidents inhere directly in matter just like substantial forms, and there's no difference between them from this point of view. According to Buridan, this is the only way to explain something very difficult to explain in the traditional interpretation of hylomorphism, namely the fact that accidents persist through substantial change, or at least seem to persist through substantial change. So substantial change is basically generation and corruption, or in the case of living beings, birth and death. So if you admit that, just like the traditional interpretation of this theory, that accidents inhere in substances that are ontologically prior to them, then it's quite difficult to explain why accidents seem to remain through substantial change. We can take a few examples for illustrating this idea, but if you consider hotness in boiling water and the air generated out of it, well, it seems like hotness is the same. It's the same property in the two substances. And the same goes for other cases proper to living things, like the color of the hair of a person, for instance, will be the same as the color of the hair of the cadaver when the person dies, which cannot really be explained in the normal interpretation of hylomorphism, because an accident cannot exist without its substrate of inherence. So if the substance changes, then the accident must change also. But if you admit, like Buridan, that accidents inhere directly in prime matter, you don't have this problem anymore. They remain the same because they are directly in matter. So both substantial forms and accidents inhere directly in prime matter. But of course, for Buridan, this doesn't mean that they have the same status, because many accidents are due to the substantial form. Many accidents are caused or generated because of the substantial form, so they don't have the same status. And let me say that what's interesting here is not the fact that certain accidents inhere directly in matter. That was already admitted by some earlier philosophers, at least for certain classes of accidents, like quantity, for instance. Many earlier philosophers thought that quantity could be in matter without the mediation of a substantial form. What's interesting here is that Buridan extends this claim to all accidents, like qualities, hotness, coldness, colors, and so on, are directly in matter, inhere directly in matter. So that's the first interesting idea. Another interesting view that Buridan has about matter is his conception or definition of generation. Here again, his view on the subject is quite different from what was the standard view by then. So according to the standard view on what is generation, what is truly really generated in a process of generation is a concrete substance, so a compound of matter and form. According to this standard interpretation, the substantial form as such is only generated incidentally, that is, only insofar as the composite substance of which it is a part is first generated. According to Buridan, what is truly generated is form. So Buridan reverses the standard interpretation of generation. The composite substance is generated only insofar as the form is generated. So he gives an argument for that, which is the following. Matter is the substrate receiving the generated thing. But if the generated thing were the composite substance, then matter would be part of it, and so would receive typo here, would receive itself. Principle, but nothing can receive itself, or nothing can be the substrate of itself. So the conclusion is that a composite substance cannot be what is generated. So form alone is what is first generated. And according to Buridan, there are many interesting grammatical developments about this. The term generation only means form. Well, strictly speaking, it means form only. This is in line with Buridan's theory of the direct inherence of accidents in matter, because substantial forms are received in matter just like accidents. This view is interesting because there is a very important difference in Aristotelianism between generation and alteration. So generation being proper to substance and alteration being proper to accidents. If you deny this distinction in an Aristotelian system, everything collapses. So you need this distinction at some point. Of course, Buridan doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to get rid of this distinction. So according to him, there is still distinction between generation and accidental change because they are not the same type of form. But still, these two types of changes are very similar. In a way, they are strictly similar because there is, in both cases, there is only one and the same substrate. Last important idea that Buridan had about matter is the case of quantity. This refers to a very important problem in late medieval Latin philosophy about the connection between matter and quantity. It's important to know, to understand the problem, that Latin medieval philosophers often distinguish two things: quantity of matter, which we could call mass in an anachronistic way, and extension or volume in modern terms. And they admitted that a thing having the same quantity of matter can be more or less extended. So a thing having the same quantity of matter can have a different extension, different volume. Then the problem was to understand if extension is something really distinct from matter, or if it's just another way of describing matter. So are extension and matter really distinct, or is this distinction only mental elaboration, mental concept, not really existing? And Buridan says yes to this question. Quantity and matter are really distinct, according to him. So for Buridan, this is the only way to explain phenomena, certain physical phenomena, in particular, phenomena of condensation, rarefaction. So for instance, it is possible to compress a body filled with air, but only up to a certain limit. And this is impossible to explain for Buridan without admitting a certain difference between matter and quantity. The argument is a bit intricate, and I don't want to discuss it. I don't have the time for it, but the argument relies on the fact that each substance seems to have a certain quantity according to which it is determined to have a certain extension and cannot go beyond certain limits, like in the case of body filled with air that you can compress. But as Buridan knows, it is still possible to modify those limits by altering the body, like when you heat a body filled with air. In that case, the body will acquire a new quantity or new extension. And this last case shows something very important, according to Buridan. The type of thing or the substantial form remains the same while quantity changes. So the form, the substantial form, cannot be quantity. And in the same way, matter remains the same while quantity changes when you heat a body, for instance. So matter cannot be quantity either. And the heat producing the change could be condensed in a different way. Even the heat could be condensed in a smaller body. So according to Buridan, this shows that the heat cannot be the quantity either. So conclusion, quantity must be something distinct from matter. And this leads Buridan to a striking thesis. Matter has parts intrinsically, but it's not intrinsically extended. In other words, matter has no quantity in itself. So, or still, in other words, partibility of matter does not imply extension. Matter has parts, but it doesn't have any extension. I don't know what to think of this last idea. I'm not sure it is consistent, but it is surely an interesting idea. And if we have time to talk about it, I would love to know if there are analogous ideas in Chinese philosophy. Very brief conclusion. So 3 interesting properties about matter, according to Buridan. Actually, Buridan is really original about the second one. So properties 1 and 3 can be found already in earlier theories of matter. But what's really interesting is the way he combines those ideas. So matter as parts but is not extended. It can receive different quantities while remaining the same, and it directly receives substantial properties as well as accidental properties. So we can see how, still within the framework of an Aristotelian theory of nature, so the framework of isomorphism, more precisely, Buridan tried to overcome the problems proper to this framework. The first idea about the inherence of accidents has very strong implications, and one could see that this theory, something very risky in this theory for the distinction between substance and accidents. And so Buridan wants to keep this conceptual framework, matter and form, but his views on quantity clearly shows that he feels them. He clearly saw the problems intrinsic to this theory of matter, and especially when it comes to explaining physical phenomena such as material density. And so it is also because of that his views, I believe, are very interesting for understanding what happened in the last stage of the pre-modern theories of matter in the West. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that was clear, and thank you.